This is the Wednesday, November 25th daily briefing on Cordova's COVID response. I'm J.R. Lewis with you on KLAM and KCDV radio in the 1, 5, and 8 p.m. hours, and or joining you on our YouTube Cordova TV channel, which is youtube.com/Cordova TV. Coming up on Thanksgiving, of course, and what we want to do with today's briefing is reinforce a point that was made by Dr. Sanders earlier in the week. I want to say, well, must have been Monday, about a particular point of confusion regarding people who need to quarantine if they are identified as a close contact of somebody who tests positive for the coronavirus. And it may seem on the surface like kind of a minor point, but actually it apparently is critical in that it can, if everybody doesn't understand this, it can become a particularly active way to spread the virus around, which of course would drive our numbers up even more than they already have been here recently. And in fact, people not understanding this process that we're going to describe may account for why we've had the jump in numbers that we have. Now, that last speculation, I would point out, is exactly that on my part. It's speculation that not quarantining properly after being named a close contact has resulted in some of the higher spread numbers, but it stands to reason given the emphasis being put on this particular problem. And it's true regardless of how much it's contributed to us having this recent burst of 11 cases, although one of them is recovered. So it's nice to have that move in the right direction. We have, yesterday it was 10 active cases, yesterday it was 11, today it's 10, with still the 2 hospitalizations, and all 10 active cases are residents. The level 4 warning, by the way, on the dashboard is still in place, and if you want to know more about the specifics of that, it's available at covid19.cityofcordova.net. But this problem has to do with people quarantining properly and for long enough if they're identified as a close contact of a COVID positive case. So here's the information specifically that the response team wants to get out. If you have been identified as a close contact of a COVID positive person, you must self-quarantine for 14 days, even if you test negative during the quarantine. So this is the problem that apparently they've been seeing, which increases the chances for spread. Somebody quarantines, they get a negative test, they think, oh, I'm all right, I can go back out into the world like normal, and end up being a significant source of spread. So again, if you're identified as a close contact of someone who tests positive, you need to self-quarantine for 14 days, even if you test negative during the quarantine. And they have sort of a word picture we'll use in a sec to emphasize that. Another point is, if you live with your family, they either need to quarantine with you and follow the same restrictions, or you can maintain a safe space within the home that limits contact, or you can quarantine in a space where you can isolate outside of your home and away from family or roommates and so on. So either everybody decides they want to just quarantine as a family or as a household for the full 14 days, or carve out an isolated spot in the home where the person who needs to quarantine can not have any contact with anybody else, or the rest of the household is okay if the person who needs to quarantine does that outside the home. If you have a friend who has a vacant apartment, or I don't know how that would work. Living on a boat for 2 weeks probably wouldn't be too much fun at this time of year, but people are creative. And there is a guideline from the CDC on how to self-quarantine properly at cdc.gov. What quarantine means, according to our local team, is, number 1, you may not enter a public space. Number 2, you need to pick up groceries curbside or have them delivered. And number 3, you'll want to call a family member or friend who can help support you during the 14-day period. And then they offer, the city offers, if you have been identified as a close contact, need to quarantine, and have any questions, you can email cordovaprepared@yahoo.com, that same address they've been using throughout this, or call the information line Monday through Friday between 8 and 3 at 424-INFO. So to illustrate why this situation, if you get a negative test and move about normally and don't isolate for the full 14 days, to illustrate this, the city put up on its Facebook page a sort of a word picture with a sample timeline of the problem this creates. If you prefer to see it visually, you can go to, I think the Cordova Prepared Facebook page would probably be best. But they have a person they call Kate. I'm sure there was a temptation to call the person Karen, but they didn't. So what it says here is, in theory, that Kate gets exposed to COVID-19 and is identified. They know Kate was exposed because she was a close contact of somebody in her household, let's say. So she's been exposed. That's day 0. First day of exposure, day 0. On day 5, Kate gets tested for COVID-19 and the results come back negative. On day 8, thinking that she didn't have COVID-19, Kate went to work in a family gathering, but was contagious on days 8 and 9, 48 hours before symptoms, and has now exposed 22 people. Then on day 10, Kate became symptomatic and tested positive. So you can see the problem that it creates if somebody is exposed, gets a negative test, goes back out, because it takes a while. It says right in the headline of this infographic that COVID-19 has up to a 14-day incubation period, which is why the quarantine recommendation is the 14 days. And there was a window of time between when our mythical Kate was exposed to the virus and when she had a positive test, all within the 14 days. And the takeaway from that is that if our Kate here had waited the full 14 days, she wouldn't have exposed the other people through work and a family gathering. So the moral of the story, again, if you know you were exposed to somebody who has the virus, who has tested positive, do your quarantine for the full 14 days, even if you get a negative test during the 14 days. And again, this imagery is available on that Facebook page, the one that's called Cordova Prepared, which is the city's official COVID response page. And I'll remind you, too, that if you want to hear what Dr. Sanders had to say about this issue, our November 23rd daily briefing is the one where she talked about it for a little while. So you can dig that up on the YouTube channel if you're interested and hear it from the doctor herself. And with that, we will bring to a close our pre-Thanksgiving daily briefing with best wishes for you to be able to celebrate safely and keep those case numbers flat and headed down. Daily briefings in the 1, 5, and 8 p.m. hours on the radio, uploaded to youtube.com/Cordova TV as soon as we can get them there. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll get you back to regular programming on the Clam and the Eagle.